Hey, welcome back to the Socialist Shelf, the podcast that cares about good fiction and changing the world. I am Jacob here with Joss.
What's up?
And today we're doing something a little different.
Yeah, I had my coffee this time.
Yeah. We're hearing from a millennial. It's time for the millennials to speak, Joss. You heard the millennials, that they've not gotten their say on this podcast in the past. It's been all old fuddy-duddies, and now it is time for the younger folks to have their say. What do you think?
Yeah, never let it be said that we're not a diverse outfit here on the Socialist Shelf. We believe in representation across nationalities, across races, across cultures, and now age is another one of those metrics.
Yeah, there we go, because we have Gideon the Night by Tamsyn Muir. How would you say that?
Muir that's how I would say it. I had a teacher named Muir back in the day, and
Muir,
that's what I recognize.
When I listen to interviews of them with people with accents saying, because she's from New Zealand, it's all managed, but yeah, Tamsyn Muir, which I don't think it's I don't believe that's a pen name, but it does sound kind of like a fantasy pen name, sci-fi fantasy pen name, but solid name.
If a person named Tamsyn weren't in the fantasy writing business, what would you even be doing with yourself, TBH?
Well, as we'll get into, originally she was going to be in the video game writing business, but pretty adjacent there.
Yeah, a lot of overlap. I'm thinking right now of Terry Pratchett's daughter, Rhiannon Pratchett.
There you go.
Yeah, she did Overlord. She did a few other games.
Mm-hmm. Well, this book, Gideon the Ninth, it was published 10th of September in 2019, and the premise of it. Wait, is this the most recent book we've done? It's got to be, right?
It's got to be, yeah.
By probably second to Three Body Problem.
And eventually, there is a trajectory here. We will be doing books from the future.
Yeah, I guess eventually that's how it works.
Yeah.
The question is, doing books from the future, is that referring to the fact that in the future we will be doing books that haven't come out when we are now speaking, or do you have like a methodology by which to access books?
Oh, I mean, if I had such a methodology right now, we would have already done it. Actually, kind of think of it, if I could access books in the future, we would already have done an episode on that. Maybe at time of recording, that's already the case. And never let it be said, again, we're going to be doing people from different ages, different cultures, different races, different species even. We're going to get some aliens in on this.
That's true, though. I do have my suspicions about Kurt Vonnegut's Planet of Origin. He does call himself a man without a country.
Yeah.
One has questions. Did he in fact come from Titan, the moon of Titan? And does Sirens of Titan, that title, perhaps give us the hints we need to decipher the clues?
I mean, at the time of that future record, countries will have been abolished.
That's true, and Kurt Vonnegut will look down with a smile as the world burns.
By the way, it's also only listenable on Spotify Brainjack, so the forward march of progress is not kind to everybody, sadly.
Yeah, no, the many chimpanzees had to die for this podcast to be brainjacked.
Well, if they could listen to the episodes that their sacrifice has wrought, they would smile from chimpanzee heaven.
Are you saying 200 members of my chimpanzee generation died to bring me this podcast?
Your chimpanzee generation?
I'm referencing the book.
I think they have different generations than we do.
I maybe, but she says in the book, 200 people of my generation died to bring me life. So
yes. See, you're more focused, and I'm still like up in the clouds saying inane stuff.
See, I was doing a reference. See, there's like since I'm editing this episode, I got to decide whether do I want to show the realism, the joke not landing, or do I want to cut it so it sounds like my joke landed perfectly? The decision will have to be made. The fact that I'm saying this means I'm definitely not cutting it.
Well, the joke not landing becomes the joke,
That's true. That's true. I become the joke, really. But no, to bring it back around, Gideon the Ninth, 2019, is a work of basically gothic sci-fi, magic, fantasy stuff. It's fun. It's a fun blend of genre. I mean, like, look up the cover. You've got a big strong woman wearing a skull. It's not actually mask, it's paint, but it looks like a skull mask with bones broken all around her. You've got like this gothic, I wouldn't say horror, but like borderline horror element meets space, meets fantasy. And a big part of the selling point is it's lesbian necromancers in space. And I mean, what more could you want? You know,
Yeah,
what more could
it's
you...
and in terms of horror, I mean, it's more Agatha Christie than H.P. Lovecraft. I mean, certainly there's incomprehensible forces at play here that we're only getting a glimpse of, if that, right? But it's much more of a locked room mystery than it is a horror story.
Much more of a locked tomb mystery, really.
Aha, there we
Am I
go.
right? Am I right? Okay.
Gideon herself couldn't have said it better.
Exactly. Well, the thing is, the thing is, Gideon does say a lot in this book because it does read a lot like a first person book. But I will get into that. It's a close third. But let me talk a little bit about Tamsyn Muir, whatever. I've been baffled by this. I'm baffled by this last name. I've been listening to too many interviews in like with like New Zealand and like British dialects. It's really fried me.
I'm sure there's phonemes that don't exist in our version of English.
That's true. But yes, let's talk about this author. She's not had a super long career. I mean, Gideon the Ninth is her debut novel. Remarkable success as a debut novel, by the way. But yeah, born in New Zealand, or no, I'm sorry, not born in New Zealand, raised in New Zealand. She was born in Australia, but moved to New Zealand like 8 months later. So basically born in New Zealand. This was in 1985. So she is a true millennial. She's an older millennial, but a millennial nonetheless, age 38. And yeah, was raised in New Zealand, and was basically from interviews, basically said her childhood was very much defined by, being a lesbian in a family that's like was actually marked by what she calls gay tragedy. She had several LGBT family members die due to like harassment and have shorter lives due to like their treatment. She talks about having what she describes as a butch aunt who died young, and knowing she was a lesbian and feeling fear coming out and talking about that really defined a lot of her childhood in the 90s and going into the early aughts when she was a little older and into high school and stuff. She said that really defined her, and the only place she felt comfortable being open with that is online, specifically on like LiveJournal and fan fiction websites. So if you've read this book, if you've read probably 10 pages of this book, you probably could have inferred she spent time on fan fiction websites. This is a very much a book of the like Tumblr and pre-Tumblr generation of writers, of people who really grew up in internet forums, writing back and forth. She wrote a lot of lesbian fan fiction behind like not paywalls, but password walls on LiveJournal. She said that was the only people she came out to for years. And in fact, and this is a horrifying story that she tells with actually great humor, but when she actually came out as a lesbian in high school, she got the shit kicked out of her. And like by a fellow student. She said people who she'd known her whole life just watched her get the shit kicked out of her.
And where did she go to school again?
I don't think it was. I don't know the name of that. It was just a high school. This was in high school, so I'm not sure. It was in New Zealand though.
Got it.
But she said this would have been in the late 90s. I'm sorry, the early aughts at this point, or around 2000, 2001. But she said she also had a very supportive family despite all that. It's just, she talks about those contradictions coming into it. But she said like a notable thing of her getting the shit kicked out of her and emerging from that and like she said she emerged with that with a kind of like what she called like humorous dignity. Like the fact that she got the shit kicked out of her and then she just like went back to her seat kind of smoldering and didn't like make a big show out of it or anything. And she said she found like a sort of humor in that, like a almost like sitcom-esque humor, and put some of that into Gideon. And you can see that, like Gideon just getting the shit kicked out of her, and then just like, well, I still have my dignity if I glare at you from across the room. And that was like, that was like formative for her. But she wrote a lot online, engaged a lot in online spaces, and felt accepted through like internet culture. She did end up like growing up to become like interested in education. She worked in various jobs and was interested in becoming like an educator. And then, but she wasn't so sure about it. And then she decided, she was going to go into video game writing because she liked writing her fan fictions. But then she like wasn't really sure what she was doing. Anyway, a friend tells her, why don't you attend this workshop, Clarion Workshop in San Diego? This is in 2010, and it's a sci-fi fantasy writer's workshop. And she said, and she quotes, this is where she first saw, quote, a story as its architecture, not just its surface, end quote. Notably, 2010, George R.R. Martin was presiding over the Clarion Workshop and several other fantasy authors. She said she realized there like what a story could be beyond just sort of like an outlet for expressing a singular point. She saw it as like a sprawling living thing, and grew to appreciate it. And since then she knew she was like, she was going to be a professional writer. Even if, she starved, she was going to be a professional writer. And just wrote and failed a lot for years until she finally got some success in 2015 with Deepwater Bride, which was she got a Nebula nom for, and that was like a short story. Wrote a handful of short stories, wrote a handful of novellas, and eventually just like broke through with Gideon the Ninth in 2019, her debut novel, which she said she wrote to her 17-year-old self, basically. Like, what did she want to read when she was 17 years old? And she wrote that, and it was Gideon the Ninth. And since then, she's experienced pretty significant success with the sequel novels, which neither of us have read. We're speaking with the context of just Gideon the Ninth, but Harrow the Ninth has come since, Nona the Ninth, and you have later this year, I believe, Electo the Ninth will be coming out, and she has actually already been given a contract to write a Western cyberpunk novella trilogy. The first book is called Go Marching In. That's all we know. It's probably going to be coming out in 2025 is the guess. So yeah, that's like, she's successful. She's doing very well. She's been nominated for all manner of awards, the Shirley Jackson Award for short fiction, novella, Yuji Award, World Fantasy Award. She won Locust Award for best first novel for Gideon the Ninth. Was nominated for several Hugos, again for like Harrow the Ninth. I don't believe she won for that, but she's done quite well. And again, is like very early in her career, considering that her first novel was 2019. Also, remarkable pace to have published 3 books since 2019 and have a 4th one coming out this year. Just got to say props to that.
Yeah, especially with the there's a considerable depth of, I mean, of course, she's got the theme naming springing pretty much fully formed from her imagination, rich with biblical, with historical, with literary references, of course, but also the prose. The prose is, I mean, it switches back and forth from this irreverence. I'm glad you brought up that it's a love letter to her 17-year-old self, basically, because there's definitely a trace of that. And it's a juxtaposition I really like. It's a juxtaposition of Gideon's total irreverence with this solemn, how would you describe it? With the solemn sort of pomp and ceremony of the setting. And among it, it's shot through with a whole bunch of genuinely innovative prose that will drill down on. This is something that almost every aspect of which I think had a whole lot of sitting down and considering how it fit, how each piece fit together. There's some stuff that feels a little more thrown in, and we'll delve into that well, but that's few and far between.
She describes like her moment of like her eyes opening when she was getting taught by Martin and several other great writers at the Clarion Workshop, of seeing stories as like full buildings, as architecture. She said she'd only ever seen, even in her own writing, like 2-dimensional stories. And then she realized, for every story has like this just absolute web of subtext and knowledge and hidden secrets and experience beneath it, whether the author is showing those things off or not. And you can really feel that. In fact, it's basically in the text of the novel itself, considering like what I would say is probably the most interesting part of the novel is its setting, which is this just gigantic, decaying, ancient Gothic mansion set on this like water planet with like skeletons running it, which I find to be the most interesting probably part of the novel. So you have this like literal architecture underneath the novel itself. So you can see how that works in. I also want to note that like her writing, like I said, very much influenced by like fan fiction spaces, very much influenced by things like Tumblr and like fandom culture. She's like very, deep into what she called fandom. She said she was very deep into Harry Potter, though she's, as a queer woman, since felt for good reason pushed out of those spaces. She's very into like quite a few things like that. Video games. She actually spoke one of her most recent interviews spoke at length about Disco Elysium and how like she considers Disco Elysium perhaps the best written thing to come out like in the last 20 years or whatever.
I still need to finish that game.
So good. Yeah, she said her quote on it was that the writers of Disco Elysium should be banned from writing because it's not fair to other authors to have to like work in the same world as them. And she talks at length about the queer themes in Disco Elysium in that interview, and you can look it up yourself. It's interesting. But to bring it back around though, I will say, and it's a thing that we like kind of have to contend with, is her prose is so shot through with like her internet background that you can it does like at times it gets very memey, like direct references to memes, and it has like definitely moments where you can almost feel like, oh, that line almost felt out of Wattpad, like you have this like dichotomy, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? All authors emerge from the context in which they were trained and they learned, whether that be their schools, whether that be the books they read, it be any manner of thing, and you can kind of feel that coming off of her. She does have an interesting quote about it, about like her own like that criticism of her, and she was talking about like the references she makes in her books and the like internet connections, and she says, quote, "I love all the utterly impenetrable references to things that were hip at the time in Gilbert and Sullivan's operettes. The novel will date. It will date horribly. And then at some point, it will go all the way around to what a wonderful period piece. Unless, of course, we have all died due to climate change," end quote. And I thought that was an interesting perspective on that, though it is like a criticism she received is like, yeah, this book, despite like all its like lovely writing, will sometimes have the character say like a studied the blade reference or something.
And I don't hate that, certainly.
I think I do, but go ahead.
I mean, that's not something I hate. The thing that I do hate is where she's like, "Oh my God, you can't just ask people why they're X." Like it's a reference that doesn't make sense within the context of the book. And because of that, it really does violence, I think, to the setting, because there's one thing, there is something to be said, certainly, because you're right, the Gilbert and Sullivan comparison is apt. The loving adherence to the era in which it's written, to the environment, indeed, in which it's written, doesn't just fall out of the sky. There is that basis to it. But at the same time, like Dewey, I kind of resent having to wait like decades for the meaning of that to be lost on the reader, right? Because that's something that's going to stick out to us no matter what.
I will say, of all the books I've read that are like chock full of contemporary references, it works a lot better.
It does, yes.
Like if you try and read a lot of like YA that has come out in the last like 20 years and books that try and like be hip with the kids, it really like this. I don't know that this works significantly better. And like, yeah, there is like an element of this that like one could argue it's like almost in a way pandering to a certain type of like demographic, right? The like sort of online queer like Tumblr girl, like very much. But I would also say it's not really pandering if she just wrote it to her 17-year-old self either,
Right.
or if it's pandering, it's very honest in doing so. And it's an interesting dynamic. I don't consider it like to be selling out as a result. I think it's just, and we can talk about it more as we get into the book itself, but I think that's just like an emergent property of where it comes out of, like considering it comes out of this culture, of this online space, warts and all. It's going to develop these things. And I also want to note one more thing is in 2020 and early 2021, there was actually a sort of, I won't even really say it was like a big push, but there was this a subsection of like some online communities actually really did have some like problems with Tamsyn. They found some old fan fiction she'd written, right?
Oh boy.
That dealt with and it really wasn't even fan fiction. It was more just like, it was only barely tangential to like a fan thing. And I did not read it, but I read some summaries and stuff. And it was basically dealing with like themes of like pedophilia and stuff. And she wrote about in this story she'd written a decade before, was about like a girl overcoming sexual abuse. She was a minor overcoming sexual abuse. It is not a story that fetishizes pedophilia, to be completely clear.
Right.
However, there was this like moment where there was like this group of people who were like basically with the subtext of this is like a predatory lesbian.
Oh God.
Saying, see, she's a pedophile lesbian, whatever, like that was like the language. And I looked through some Twitter threads and stuff, and it was very much like just old stereotypes, basically pulling stereotypes of like the queer groomer. And like if you actually look through the text of what she wrote, it's like a pretty bad, it's like I only skimmed it, it's a pretty bad fan fiction. Like it's not very good, like in a technical sense, but it's not, it's and so she actually talks about that a lot, about like the queer author being hemmed in by like both the expectations of like a more progressive sect of like people who are like, oh well, you have to be the ideal queer author, but also still like coming under a very conservative old style of fire from like the right as well. And
it's a very
queer author, especially queer women, live in.
It's a very sort of Galileo's middle finger dynamic, right? Where you're getting it from the people who are absolutely coming after her in bad faith because she's a queer woman writing about her experience, and they don't want, that sort of person writing. But you also get it from, a more, I would say, well-intentioned, though misguided source who, the reality of it is, if you're writing honestly from your experience, you're going to run afoul of somebody who is just sick of reading, oh, here's another LGBT tragedy story, right?
It's interesting. She actually says, and she has a great quote, and she's a really great she's got some great interviews. I might link a couple if I remember to. But she talks about, she said there was this whole period where this wasn't like a cancellation. I don't even like to use that term, but whatever. But there was like a group of people online who were like, and like spoiler alert, I guess, you're going to get spoiled on a book if you're listening to this episode, that there's like queer death in Gideon the Ninth. Gideon the Ninth, dies in the book. And people like came after her and said like, hey, like you're doing the bury your gays thing. Like aren't like, are queer couples not allowed to get a happy ending or whatever? And she said, listen, the LGBT community, she's like, has been out on the dance floor for a long time. And she says, and I wanted to pick the dance floor, but I also wanted to pick all the blood that's on the dance floor because there's a lot of it. And she says, she describes her books as blood on the dance floor. She's like, here's the thing. She says, you can't tell me not to bury my gays when so many gays I know are buried.
100%. And also she buries one gay out of many.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people die in this book, but like, but like, it's an interesting point. Like she makes this like point about like all the things she's written to date, her short stories and these are around death and around this and like making light of it, but also dealing with it. And she says, yeah, she like talks about like her experience as a queer woman has very much been like, there was this like sort of carefree aspect in one hand, like this like idea of like pride and celebrating oneself and like, you know, embracing like a sort of a joy that comes with that, and also embracing the darkness that comes with that. And she said she felt like she was able to build some fusion of that into these books. And I do think in a way that it is successful. I do think it is successful in doing that, but it is interesting. But I just want to note those like two like kind of controversy things, just because when you Google her name, like controversy comes up and you look and it really is just pretty absurd criticisms. Because I was like, oh, well, and it's not like we wouldn't have talked about her if I thought I wouldn't acknowledge if I thought she genuinely was a problematic person. We talked about fucking H.P. Lovecraft and like Tim LaHaye, like it's, you know, and Bill Clinton. Like it's not like it's not like we're all like above that. I do genuinely just think she's, you know, got a bad rap on that. But I did want to address that just because it's a thing that comes up when you look her up. But I find her to be very I find her to be very interesting. I'm interested in watching her career as it develops. I'm going to read the rest of these books. But, you know, without further ado, unless you have anything else to say on her, I think we should get into Gideon the Ninth.
Yeah, no, you've you know more about her than I do, you know, and I want to know more about her, certainly. You know, she's genuinely, I mean, just from reading this, you know, you can't write something like this without being genuinely inventive and very deeply knowledgeable about certain interests that show up in the narrative, fencing among them. We'll get into it all. You know, it's a person that I would genuinely like to shoot the shit with.
And it is interesting. I do look forward to seeing her more in the future, because it looks like Tor publishers have basically just given her a blank check to like write what she wants to.
Brilliant.
Going forward. Because she was so successful with this and so while writing an inventive story. So like, I think she'll come up with cool shit. I mean, what a hell of a debut novel, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's anyway, genuinely unlike anything that I've read before.
Anyway, okay. Well, I've talked for most of this. So Joss, you want to get into a little plot summary here, getting into the characters, getting into whatever's going on in this wacky, deteriorating universe.
Yeah, deteriorating. Well, and it's deteriorated before is the thing.
Yeah.
We'll get into that, won't we? Because I remember you posted that that SpongeBob meme, right? That's like, you know, I love lore. I want to talk about lore, you know, and there is a lot of lore that goes into this. You know, it's a space fantasy setting, certainly. So you're going to get a certain amount of that, right? It's set in this star system orbiting around this star called Dominicus, yes. And it's got okay, this is a really stupid question. How many planets are there? 9, right?
9.
Yeah, 9 planets and a star.
Unless they like unveil a secret 10th planet in the next couple books, which like they absolutely could.
They could.
But like, to one more time, just to be clear, we have only read this book. Any knowledge that we have of the next few books are like incidental and like absorbed incidentally. They're not being referenced directly here. I know there's at least one listener of this that has read the books and loves them very much. And she may be like, you know, when we say things like, yeah, there's 9 planets, she might be like stamping the floor for all I know right now. But based on the knowledge of this book, there are 9 planets around the star Dominicus.
There are 9 planets, yes. And there almost weren't, because 10,000 years ago, there was a cataclysm that wiped out the star system. The sun went out. All life on these planets was destroyed. But then
hate it when that happens.
There was this guy called, he is now called the Emperor. Let me see in the first page here. Yeah, the Emperor
Undying.
Yeah, the Emperor, the King Undying, the kindly Prince of Death, the Necrolord Prime. He was this enormously powerful necromancer who somehow was able to revivify the sun, revivify the 9 planets, basically bring the entire system back to life. And 10,000 years on, that's our setting, is this empire that spans this system, and it's split into 9 houses, of course, one for each world. And it is on this ninth house, on this ninth planet, that our story begins. And the ninth house is this ninth planet plays host to something called the Locked Tomb, and it's kind of a synecdoche there because it's one representing part representing the whole. There's the Locked Tomb on the planet, and then the planet and the house are kind of referred to interchangeably as the Locked Tomb. In that Locked Tomb, there is a force that the Emperor defeated. One assumes it was involved with the Great Cataclysm 10,000 years ago. And it's sealed away there. He defeated it, but he couldn't destroy it. And the ninth house is this cult that's kind of sprung up around the tomb. To their aim as a house, because they're shrouded in mystery from like even the other houses. They don't talk to anybody. But their aim is to guard the tomb, and they've ended up worshiping whatever's in there.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can't help but think the ninth house is very much, it's like described not only as like that, but it's like more austere. It's dark. It's shrouded in mystery, and it says a lot of like people from other houses will like that are like weirdos will defect sometimes through history to the ninth house. And I can't help but think of like, the Watchers on the Wall or whatever from Game of Thrones, which considering George R.R. Martin like was actively involved in like making her want to be a writer. Can't say that that's not direct inspiration. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. It's just an interesting thought, but it's very much like that. It's these like wardens on the outside of the universe who've just been out there so long they got kind of wacky with it. Like they just started being weird.
And it's not, it's not to the extent of, I will take no wives, I will father no children, right? Sure. But there is, it's far enough
not on purpose, at least.
Well, yes, it's far enough in the future that you can basically just vat grow kids. Like there's one offhand reference to XX carry, which is like, traditional reproduction, but that's considered uncommon, if not weird. And
but you've got your main character Gideon, who and again, you might find this out in a later book, but we don't know. She is not of the ninth, not really. Her mom was some refugee, some rando who died bringing Gideon down to the Locked Tomb, and they never really knew her. They never really knew her mom, and she became an indentured servant to the Locked Tomb, to the ninth house, simply because, they raised her, and it was like, we paid for you to eat and live, and so you are our indentured servant for that. And she, naturally has some problems with that, being raised in this just creepy ass house with notably no one except a handful of like just weird freaks who are left, like old weird freaks, a bunch of skeleton servants, and then essentially like very few people even close to her age, and only one person within like 10 to 15 years of her, that being the daughter of the house, the sort of the princess, the reverend daughter, Harrow Hawk, who is a master necromancer, and is destined to become her goth GF, of course.
Yes, Harrowhark Nonagesimus, which I mean, we'll say that again. Harrowhark Nonagesimus. This is not this is not your average like Bob, Steve, like Annie, like the names are shot through with meaning. They grab you by the throat and they scream, "Read a book."
I did think it was really interesting where at the very beginning when Harrow walked out and just said, "Hi, my name is Ebony Darkness Dementia Ravenway." I thought that was kind of odd, but I'm honestly shocked there's not a reference to that meme in this book.
Especially with somebody with a background in Harry Potter as Tamsyn Muir had. You can't enter the Harry Potter fandom in the internet space and not run into My Immortal at some point.
If we get to, if I don't know, I just realized that at some point we have to do My Immortal.
Well, I mean, you can't do My Immortal without doing a dramatic reading, can you?
That's a good point. Good point. That would be a great Patreon. But anyway, go on in a conceptual world where that existed. But anyway, on we go. But yeah, we've got Gideon, who is actually, she doesn't really get described till later in the book. But she's like, a big, very muscular, I'd say girl, like she's 18, 19 years old. Red hair, just kind of beat up, but like, still like pretty attractive, probably. It's kind of unclear. Like it's unclear because she's painted up most of the book, like as it is, but we know she's buff and she's ginger. We know that for sure.
Buff, ginger, and has the only pair of aviators maybe in the entire solar system.
Thank God. Yes.
Which,
she does like aviator sunglasses, and she thinks it's cool to wear them inside, which it is.
Yes, I'm completely
She's Cobra
fine with
from
this.
Cobra.
I'm completely fine with this again. And from the very first sentence of the book, right? You get that juxtaposition of, again, pomp and ceremony with her total just not inability to give a shit. In the myriadic year of our Lord, the 10,000th year of the King Undying, the kindly Prince of Death, Gideon Nav packed her sword, her shoes, and her dirty magazines, and she escaped from the house of the ninth.
Yeah. Like, it's interesting because she's raised in the ninth house, but because she has no necromantic talent, and because she's just this like indentured servant, she's not really raised of the ninth. Like, she's taught everything, but it all bounces off of her, and she's never given a reason to, embrace the culture as her own, and that's for a very good reason. And it's because they don't treat her like one of her own. And so she is, inherently irreverent. She learns a lot about, we don't know where she gets these like dirty magazines and these like comic books from, but she's really into those, and like really into like these like comic book tales of like just random bullshit happening. And of course, like just different stuff. Like she's very much like influenced by that. And she's just obsessed with the fact, or the idea of being a soldier, just going off and joining the cohort, as it's called. Who is the cohort fighting? We're not really sure. There's some other groups that are being fought. Maybe that's important in the next books. Maybe it's not. I don't really mind that we don't know. We just know there are wars going on. She wants to go do that because she's kick-ass with a sword. She is like, a butch lesbian who's good with a sword, and she's been trained because that's what she's good at. That's what she's talented at. She's not stupid, but she feels she's treated like she's stupid in this house because it's like being smart in this house means being a necromancer, and she doesn't have any magic in her so far as we can tell. So she's just not cut out to do that. It is interesting, like the idea of a indentured servant in a house where like skeletons do everything.
Skeletons do everything, but as we'll see, like there's a spectrum of necromantic ability, right? Where
Sure.
they can do everything, they can fight for you, they can lift and carry stuff, but not perfectly, right? They get
Well, it
brought
seems
back.
unclear what her actual role is in the house, and I think there just isn't much of one. Like, she doesn't have, I don't think she had a lot of like work to do as an indentured servant.
Yeah, except to be, I mean, she trained with Crux and Aglamini, right? The seneschal and the captain of the guard of the house, right? She's brilliant with a two-handed sword.
Yeah.
And that's what she grew up learning. So, that's basically, that's basically her function, right? She doesn't have any necromantic ability. What she does have is, physical ability. Like, you might as well, you're wasted as a laborer, and you are, there's many reasons. Cards on the table. I looked ahead at the plots of the next two books. I'm not going to disclose anything, but like there's various reasons why she's ended up where she has.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, like there is there's stuff that's disclosed later in the book that we can talk about more, but like it's not, her time in the house is very much just kind of being like the whipping girl for Harrow. Like,
yes, that's actually the term that Harrow uses at one point. Yes.
Harrow is just the sort of princess of the house, and she treats Gideon terribly because she's just a dark, she's kind of just got darkness in her. She's a resentful person. She's got some like trauma for sure. And we know from pretty early on that Gideon's parents, who run the house, are dead. they are dead, and Harrow has been basically doing necromancy on them, tricking other necromancers to not knowing, because she's a very good necromancer, not knowing they're dead. Everyone thinks they've taken a vow of silence, and Harrow has basically been running the show and also keeping the other houses from knowing the ninth house is kaput. Like, it's
Yeah, they're dead
so,
by their own hands too. Something has driven them to that point.
yes. And but basically the book starts with Gideon's like however many, like 19th or something escape attempt.
86th.
86th. Okay, it's a ton. She's tried to get off planet a ton of times. This one fails too. Harrow is always foiling her escape attempts. And it makes, and Gideon asks her, why do you do this? And Harrow answers, because, and this is the quote, because I completely fucking hate you, no offense. Which is a very like teenage girl thing, just like shitty teenage girl thing to say.
Truly, Cupid has spoken.
I do love it. Like, it's, that is, I just like, because we mentioned it earlier, I want to like draw a line for my problems with the book, is not like the irreverence or the just like teenagers talking like teenagers. My like really only problems with the books are when they don't, when there's like this weird outside interjection, which I can get into, but I do really like the like sassy nature of the characters when they do actually sound like themselves. And I really enjoy from the very beginning that as much of like a stone cold, gothic, terrifying badass as Harrow is, you can still feel her rehearsing that line before she says it, like to herself over and over and over again. Like, these are just two like 18, 19-year-olds who are like emotionally stunted and like working out like their weird traumas and attraction to each other in like just bizarre, angry ways.
Oh yes, because you don't talk the way that they talk to each other unless you've devoted serious thought to the other person, you know, how to push their buttons.
And I want to note, like, also, like, it's funny because, like, okay, so I'm not like too worried about like revealing things that it reveals later in the book. Like, Gideon is aware of Harrow's deception, and like Gideon has that over Harrow, but Gideon's like, and Harrow would never kill me though, and it's like, why not? And the reason is because she doesn't want to kill Gideon, obviously, but like Gideon's like got reasons why Harrow wouldn't kill her. But like the thing is, I'm pretty confident, like, if it was anyone else, Harrow would just kill them.
Oh,
Like,
100%.
she's not above killing people. Like,
And
she's
what consequences would she
death.
face? She's literally like the uncrowned queen of her house.
But anyway, basically the starting plot point of this book is that the Lord Undying, the great emperor, has summoned a necromancer from each of the 9 houses to go through a challenge, or I guess each of the 8 houses aside from the 9, because there's 9 and the emperor's is the first. So summoned 8 necromancers to potentially become a lictor. And what is a lictor? You don't really figure that out till like later, but essentially it's like a super powerful immortal necromancer.
Yes.
To like
yes, the
use
emperor,
the power of the king.
The emperor is, I mean, they literally describe him as God, right? The man who became God and God who became
Big
man.
G, yes.
Yes. So if he's God, right, the lictors are assistant God.
In fact, there's like a weird Christ analogy going on, including the lictor theorem literally being written underneath on a whiteboard. It is finished.
There's a lot of biblical stuff in here. Somebody says come and see at one point.
Yeah, there's the like the God and man being the same flesh. You've got like the thing with there's a lot like the theme of sacrifice, the theme of like blood sacrifice. It's unclear. I had trouble finding. You could find 1,000,001 like posts about it, but I had trouble finding like a good concrete sources on like the meaning of everything. And I don't know that I need all that either. I don't think there are 1-to-1s, but it is interesting to see like that being thrown around in here.
Yeah. The end notes do some heavy lifting in terms of explaining the stuff,
Yeah.
like explain the characters' names and the symbolism it's also the source of that massive spoiler that I texted you about the other day, which is again Gideon dies.
Yeah.
So, if you're looking at the end matter to decipher a little bit of all the book's theming, do be warned about that spoiler, namely that Gideon dies.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to read that Gideon
Yeah,
dies
yeah, certainly
before
not.
you find out that Gideon dies. Yeah.
Indeed.
But yeah, so they need a necromancer to come to the first planet, and the necromancer has to bring a cavalier with them. Has
And
to
by
bring it.
tradition, the Cavalier has to wield a rapier, and that's rubs Gideon the wrong way because her whole life she's trained with two-handed sword, a Zweihander, basically.
And she's like buff as hell. Like she's not a precision fighter. She can be because she's very talented, but like she is a strength build, not a dexterity build. Like
Indeed.
she's big and strong. So there's this whole bit about she's got to learn how to use the rapier, and she's got to be trained in proper manners. And a big thing that she's got to do is she's got to be Gideon the Ninth, even though she's not. Her real name is Gideon Nav. She is not of the Ninth. She does not give a shit of the Ninth, but she's going to go along as a cavalier because this is her opportunity to actually, for once, get off this world. And if everything goes right, and if Harrow is able to become a lictor, she has the full promise that she will be able to actually permanently leave.
Yes. Yes, which is her. I mean, again, she's not doing this out of some, patriotism, out of some devotion to the emperor. It's literally just, I want to see the world. I want to see the galaxy.
And she doesn't see much of it, but she does see one particular place, a very interesting place.
Yes,
Which
Canaan House.
Yes, on the planet of the first. And this is like the most interesting part to me because it's this beautiful Gothic, gigantic mansion that's made on the water, that is just falling apart after like 10,000 years of God, the emperor, not being there. And what I chose is like my quote from this novel is actually describing it because I find it to be like the novel, like working it's like how the novel works for me, like the language of it, like the language at its best.
Which
it's just
one?
a quick say again.
Which one?
The quote is, quote, "The whole place had the look of a picked at body, but hot damn, what a beautiful corpse."
You know what? That's actually that's actually literally my first choice was that specific paragraph. Actually, you know what? You took the end of it. I'll take the beginning of it because this really stood out to me. We're getting this part out of the way early this episode, folks. Okay. Back in its day, at least, it would have been a monument to wealth and beauty. In the present, it was a castle that had been killed. And from, you and I are both writers, that's really striking. It's a really easy way to get prose rolling, which is to assign uncharacteristic elements to something. Castles cannot ordinarily be killed. And then you unpack what has stirred that juxtaposition in you,
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of, again, you picked the irreverence and I picked the solemnity in terms of what this book is juxtaposing.
Right. And it's very much written in this. It is. I appreciate that she didn't do the easy thing and go first person, because it would have been really easy to do first person in this book.
Yes,
and I don't hate first person all the time. I'm not anti first person necessarily. But
what do we think? What do we do with that? Because it is third person, it is narrator, not necessarily omniscient narrator.
Not at all. No, it's a very close third person.
It's very close third person, yes, but with the what a beautiful corpse, hot damn, it feels like an interjection from Gideon, which tickles me to no end.
Yeah, that's how I read it. It's very much like a I mean, there's nothing that you see, as far as I could tell the whole time, nothing you see that Gideon does not, right? You're not learning anything Gideon does not know. You're not seeing anything Gideon does not see. All your perception is limited to Gideon's perception. Not all the language is necessarily things Gideon would think, but you are limited to Gideon's eyes, Gideon's ears, Gideon's brain. So
I just had a thought that that will make sense once we unpack exactly where this goes.
Okay.
Sorry, go on.
But yeah, it makes for an interesting read. I think it would be a weaker novel if it was in first person, even though that would probably been easier to write.
Oh, 100%.
Considering how much first person ish stuff there is in this. So yeah, definitely appreciate that. But I can feel the elements of, like, I honestly am almost certain that there is a draft of this that's in first person.
Yeah, and
or at least a large portion of a draft.
Yeah, again, like for reasons that will become clear once we unpack the lore of this a little more, it makes much more sense from third person, from, shall we say, not tying the narrative to one specific identity.